And instead of pandering to the jihad sympathizers and America-hating radicals, we will deport them. We will deport them very quickly. We have no choice.
That is what Donald Trump said on the campaign trail. And fast forward to February 6th, and he laid the groundwork to do just that. He signed an executive order to deport international students who dared to protest Israel's genocide in Gaza, which, by the way, is right in line with Project Esther, the portion of Project 2025 that aimed to crush pro-Palestinian activism within the first 12 to 24 months of his administration. And this administration just made another move towards that goal by disappearing one of the organizers of last year's protest at Columbia University. Common Dreams reports Mahmoud Khalil, a graduate of Columbia who was a student at the school until December, was arrested by Immigration and Customs Enforcement on Saturday evening as he was returning home to his university-owned apartment with his wife, who is 8 months pregnant. He is reportedly being held in central Louisiana ICE processing center over 1,000 miles away from home while the Trump administration works to revoke his green card under the State Department's Catch and Revoke initiative launched last week with the goal of deporting students who are deemed to be, quote, pro-Hamas. Khalil, who is an Algerian citizen of Palestinian descent, was an organizer of the Solidarity encampment that was erected on Columbia's New York City campus last spring to demand the school divest from companies that have supported Israel's bombardment of Gaza. Now, as journalist Prem Thakur points out, his own attorneys didn't even know where he was after he was first abducted. They were first told that he was at an ICE detention facility in New Jersey. Then they found out that he was thousands of miles away at a facility in Louisiana, although that hasn't even been confirmed at the time that I record this video. So to recap, a permanent resident with a green card was abducted by ICE, denied habeas corpus, taken to an unknown location. We're still not sure where he is. His own lawyer doesn't know where he is. He's now being detained for an undefined amount of time. We don't know at this point if he's been charged with the crime, but he's going to be in ICE detention until he's deported, even though he presumably didn't even get a hearing to determine whether or not they could revoke his green card in the first place. None of this is legal. That's putting it mildly. None of this is legal. And the question is, what crime did he actually commit? Because as far as we know, he hasn't been charged with a crime, and organizing a protest is protected by the First Amendment. And based on Trump's post on Truth Social, he's not even alleging that Mahmoud committed a crime, which means that they're just making him a political prisoner, literally, because he dared to protest his university's complicity with genocide. And that, according to Trump, makes him a terrorist sympathizer worthy of deportation. This is dystopian, to put it in one way. But Trump wrote on Truth Social, quote, "Following my previously signed executive orders, ICE proudly apprehended and detained Mahmoud Khalil, a radical foreign pro-Hamas student on the campus of Columbia University. This is the first arrest of many to come. We know there are more students at Columbia and other universities across the country who've engaged in pro-terrorist, anti-Semitic, anti-American activity, and the Trump administration will not tolerate it. Many are not students. They are paid agitators." He has no evidence for this, by the way. "We will find, apprehend, and deport these terrorist sympathizers from our country, never to return again. If you support terrorism, including the slaughtering of innocent men, women, and children, your presence is contrary to our national and foreign policy interests, and you are not welcome here. We expect every one of America's colleges and universities to comply. Thank you." Now, the irony here is that Mahmoud is against the slaughtering of innocent men, women, and children, hence why he organized a protest against Israel's genocide in Gaza. And even though Trump says that the goal is to root out anti-Semitism on college campuses, Project Esther is deliberately targeting Jewish groups as well, like Jewish Voice for Peace, which is explicitly against Israel's genocide in Gaza as well. And before ICE abducted Mahmoud, Trump warned that there'd be penalties for universities and U.S. citizens who partook in anti-genocide protests. He wrote on Truth Social, "All federal funding will stop for any college, school, or university that allows illegal protests." Didn't define what that means, and I'm assuming it's just any protest he doesn't like. "Agitators will be imprisoned or permanently sent back to the country from which they came. American students will be permanently expelled or, depending on the crime, arrested. No masks. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Now, days after he made this post on Truth Social, the administration canceled $400 million in grants to Colombia because he claims that the university didn't do enough to crack down on pro-Palestinian protests, which is a lie. They were ruthless to these pro-Palestinian protesters, but it wasn't enough for Donald Trump. I guess he wanted to see more skulls get cracked. But make no mistake about it, the goal is to shut down any and all criticism of Israel. That is what this is about. It's why 38 states have anti-BDS laws on the books. It's why Congress banned TikTok. It's why organizers of anti-genocide protests are now being abducted, apparently. They know that our country's support for the apartheid regime of Israel is unjustifiable and unpopular. They know that the propaganda that they once used to justify their support for it is no longer persuasive to anyone. And since they can't get us to willingly support an apartheid regime and get us to enthusiastically send more of our tax dollars to Israel so they can drop more bombs on the heads of children, what they're doing instead is they're just trying to take away our freedom to protest what's happening. And in theory, civil rights organizations like, say, the Anti-Defamation League should be screaming the loudest about Mahmoud's abduction. But guess what they're doing instead? They're endorsing this move by the Trump administration, even though they tacitly admit that Mahmoud's due process rights have been violated. They tweeted, "We appreciate the Trump administration's broad, bold set of efforts to counter campus anti-Semitism, and this action further illustrates that resolve by holding alleged perpetrators responsible for their actions. Obviously, any deportation action or revocation of a green card or visa must be undertaken in alignment with required due process protections. We also hope that this action serves as a deterrent to others who might consider breaking the law on college campuses or anywhere." Wow. I mean, this is low even for the ADL, the organization that defended Elon Musk's Hitler salute at the inauguration. Even for them, this is low because they know what they're saying. First of all, he didn't break laws on college campuses. Colleges don't make the laws, right? He violated their rules, but those rules aren't laws. Right? So what law did he break? They won't say because they know that he didn't break any laws. But even though they signal that Mahmoud's constitutional rights have been violated, they still endorse this move regardless. It is ridiculous. To say that this organization's reputation has been destroyed would be an understatement. They are straight up illegitimate. And they don't support his illegal detention because they actually think that he's a terrorist sympathizer or anti-Semitic. Nobody thinks that. Trump doesn't think this. They support this move because it could be a deterrent, as they say, against anyone else who chooses to exercise their First Amendment rights to stand up for human rights. They don't want us protesting against Israel's genocide. That's what this is about. And they're willing to do anything to get us to not speak up. And it's also interesting that the Anti-Defamation League has gone out of their way to defame anti-genocide protesters as terrorist sympathizers in order to launder the reputation of a racist apartheid regime. Going forward, everybody needs to just call them the Pro-Defamation League because functionally that is what they've become. But even if you assume all the lies that are being told about Mahmoud were true, that he explicitly supported Hamas, was pro-terrorist, anti-Semitic, and anti-American, keep in mind that no crime is being alleged here. In fact, at the time that I record this video, we still don't know if he's being charged with a crime. But even if he explicitly said that he supports Hamas, he didn't, but even if he said that, that would be protected speech under the First Amendment, so it wouldn't justify him being a political prisoner. But the goal here is to make an example out of Mahmoud and send a message to everybody else that if you criticize Israel doing a genocide and condemn public and private entities complicit with said genocide, you're next. And I can't help but think that the timing feels very conspicuous because the ceasefire, for those who don't know, it just expired. And what comes next might be something that triggers even more protests. So by making a show of Mahmoud's abduction, this might be the Trump administration's way of preemptively stopping protests by intimidating people and getting them to obey in advance. And when I say that they're making a show out of this, I want to show you what I mean, because they're actually joking about this on social media. On Twitter, the official White House account shared a picture of Mahmoud with a caption that read, "Shalom Mahmoud," with a quote from Trump which reads, "We will find, apprehend, and deport these terrorist sympathizers from our country, never to return again." Now, they also responded to a tweet from Senate Judiciary Democrats calling for his release with another picture of him saying he led activities aligned to Hamas, meaning that he protested the indiscriminate killing of civilians in Gaza who have nothing to do with Hamas. And if his peaceful anti-genocide protest is supposedly tantamount to support for terrorism, what's to stop them from deeming other protests and other acts of civil disobedience as terrorism as well? Maybe climate change activists blocking the construction of an oil pipeline get charged with terrorism next. Maybe they start to call protesters at state capitals or protesters at Tesla dealerships terrorists. I mean, the point is that this is one of the most brazen attacks on the First Amendment we've seen in quite some time, and it's another dangerous sign of what's to come. It's another step towards fascism that we are witnessing from this administration. As Representative AOC put it, if the federal government can disappear a legal U.S. permanent resident without reason or warrant, they can disappear U.S. citizens too. Anyone, left, right, or center, who has highlighted the importance of constitutional rights and free speech should be sounding the alarm now. Rashida Tlaib added, "We all have to fight back against fascism. This is a test case, and it couldn't be more important we stop this and bring him home. Mahmoud's rights are our rights. If they can illegally abduct him and shred his legal rights, they will never stop. Anyone this lawless administration disagrees with can be targeted." And just to put it into perspective for you, everyone can see this. To admit that this is not what it is, a brazen violation of the First Amendment, means that you're either so far up Trump's ass that you could never admit that he would do anything wrong, or you don't actually care about free speech like you say you do, right-wingers. But it's so bad that even Ann Coulter can understand how bad this is. She tweeted out, "There's almost no one I don't want to deport, but unless they've committed a crime, isn't this a violation of the First Amendment?" Why, yes, Ann, it is, and I'm glad you asked. But I'm not sharing this tweet to give credit to Ann Coulter. I'm sharing this tweet with you that she made because if even she can understand how dangerous this is, then it speaks to the gravity of the situation. We all benefit from the First Amendment. We all benefit from free speech rights. And even she knows that if the government can literally abduct someone for protesting, they might come after her too for being too racist. Not that she has anything to worry about in the short term, but the point still stands. If you care about free speech, as many right-wingers claim, this is the time to mobilize and sound the alarm, especially considering how half-assed this entire debacle has been. This administration hasn't even tried to put up the veneer of legitimacy here. They're just saying, yeah, basically this dude protested and we don't like his protest, so fuck him. We're going to deport him. That's basically what they're saying. Now, Prem Thakur put it much more eloquently in an interview with Democracy Now!, but he tries to highlight just how absurd this situation is.
One thing that's really worth underscoring here is just how clumsy and haphazard this attempt by the administration has been to detain Mahmoud and to subsequently revoke his green card. First of all, as the professor said, these agents forced themselves into this apartment building, did not necessarily apparently introduce themselves, demanded to see their identification, Mahmoud and his wife, and they first chose to tell him that they were revoking his visa, that the State Department was revoking his visa. Upon them being told that, in fact, Mahmoud had a green card, they were on the phone. They said, oh, actually, the green card's revoked as well. And so that was the basis for the consequent or subsequent way in which this has been seen, which is that the administration has been very lackluster in their explanation for how this is justifiable at all. First, the shadowy arrest and detention at all, the fact that it's unclear where Mahmoud is right now. I can sort of break some potential possible news right now that it seems, based on internal ICE detaining tracking, that Mahmoud appears to be in Louisiana as was feared. That is not confirmed, but that is what we are seeing from the ICE detention tracker, which can sometimes be delayed or lagged. But that is something to keep in mind, that Mahmoud, who was detained in New York City, is 36 hours later already possibly in Louisiana. So there's that aspect, the shadowy aspect of this. There's also the aspect that the administration doesn't seem to know exactly how to justify this very haphazard unilateral move, and is trying to appeal to simply President Trump's executive orders rather than things like the Constitution or case law or legal precedent. You have Marco Rubio, as mentioned, saying that they will be revoking not just visa cards, but also and/or green cards, which is very much beyond his sort of stated authority, his jurisdiction. There's one individual law that gives him wide authority to do so, but this would require Marco Rubio personally interfering on foreign policy grounds to justify such a deportation. And so I think you're going to see a lot of not just moral pushback, but legal pushback against something that is just so haphazard, so reckless, and so unjustifiable in so many different ways.
Yeah. And it's worth stating once again that this is all very illegal. There is no ground whatsoever to revoke his green card. And if they wanted to revoke his green card, he is entitled to a hearing. But presumably, they've already just decided unilaterally that they're going to take it away from him, even though he hasn't committed a crime and they haven't charged him with the crime and they've presented no evidence that he's committed a crime. Listen, I don't care what your ideology is. Everyone should be alarmed by this because in theory, the Constitution and the rule of law is supposed to protect residents from abuses like this. But that's clearly not happening, which begs the question, is the Constitution even still in effect at this point? If they can get away with something this brazen, do we even have a Constitution? Are they just completely ignoring it at this point? This is a question that we have to ask ourselves. Now, to add insult to injury, the administration is promising to do even more. Never mind the fact that they don't have the legal authority to do this to one person, but they're announcing their intent to do this to more people. Because who's going to stop them? So again, I ask, is the Constitution even in effect, or is it just invalid at this point? It's alarming, but even though Trump is escalating this war on free speech, I'd be remiss to not point out how it's been a bipartisan endeavor, because Mahmoud is one of many anti-genocide activists who's been harassed, intimidated, and doxxed, and Democratic governors like Josh Shapiro and Kathy Hochul have been ruthless in their demonization and crackdown of anti-genocide activists, and this was a point made perfectly by Emma Vigeland on MSNBC.
Hochul here recently at Hunter College removed a job posting for a Palestinian studies teaching position, saying she wanted to be sure anti-Semitic theories would not be taught. It's not like they have a very good track record on this either.
No, but they should. And I point to what I said earlier about the Democratic voters are not aligned with how the leadership is responding here. And I think we can demand more of Democrats right now. There was a poll in CNN in February that said that over 70% of Democratic voters are unhappy with congressional Democrats right now and how they haven't stood up to Trump more. And I think that goes hand in hand with the Israel debate here. How can we draw a contrast with Donald Trump and his authoritarianism? When the Republicans talk about free speech, what they mean is, can we say slurs on the internet again?
Correct.
Can we feel okay saying the R word?
Can we celebrate Christmas?
I mean, really, that's what it is. And then, but for the Democrats and for the left, the anti-war movement has always been an integral part of social progress, particularly on college campuses as well. So when we're trying to combat Trump, drawing a contrast is as important as anything. And I think to bring young people back on board who have been galvanized by this, seeing images of slaughtered children over and over on their phone. I mean, there was a letter written by 99 physicians, nurses back in October to Vice President Harris and Biden at the time. And they said that at minimum, 118,000 Palestinians have been killed. That is a lowball estimate and much higher than the, 47,000 that people are still using at this point. This is an untold slaughter, and Amnesty International calls it a genocide, as does Human Rights Watch. The Democrats have to reckon with how young people have seen the leadership of the party accept this and then move forward in a more positive direction because they can, because the voters want them to.
Well said. And it's always important to bring it back to the reason why people were protesting in the first place. They wanted the genocide to end. The anti-genocide campus protesters were following in the tradition of student activists who protested the Vietnam War, who fought to desegregate their universities. And if this really is the beginning of a nationwide crackdown on pro-Palestinian free speech, anyone who's part of these organizations or who was a student, be it Jewish Voice for Peace, or if not now when, they need to familiarize themselves with their rights. In fact, all of us do, because there's no telling when they're going to come for the rest of us. So let me just tell you, you have the right to remain silent. You can request a warrant if ICE asks to search you, and you don't have to sign anything. And if the abduction of Mahmoud is meant to serve as a deterrent, we need to create a deterrent ourselves against this by speaking out against this as loudly as we possibly can for Mahmoud. Now, thankfully, people have already done that. There were hundreds of protesters outside of the ICE office in New York City, and on top of that, more than 1.7 million people have signed a letter by the Action Network calling for the release of Mahmoud. And I'd highly encourage you to sign it yourself and share it everywhere you can. Now, at the time that I record this video, journalist Ryan Grimm reports that a judge has temporarily paused his deportation, which is expected since, again, you can't just revoke a resident's green card without a hearing, which is what the Trump administration seemingly tried to do. But this should be a wake-up call to anyone that called people like myself hyperbolic for warning you that this administration was dangerous. The fascist threat that Trump poses is no longer theoretical. It's as real as a heart attack. And if we don't bind together and have real solidarity in times like these, it's only a matter of time before the number of political prisoners grows from one to many.